5 years ago, my entire world fell apart, all in a single afternoon. I had just come home for the summer break from college, feeling that familiar comfort of returning to a place I'd always thought of as safe. My parents, who I had trusted and leaned on through every challenge in my life, sat me down in the living room. Their faces were somber, almost like they were about to deliver news of a family tragedy. I braced myself, thinking someone close to us had passed away, but what followed was far worse. They looked at me and, without hesitation, accused me of stealing $10,000 from their bank account. I was floored, my mind scrambling to make sense of what they were saying. I hadn't taken any money. I didn't even know they had that amount in their account. I tried to tell them it wasn't true, that I'd never taken a cent from them. But they didn't believe me. They said they had bank statements, proof that the money had been transferred into an account under my name. That accusation shattered me. My parents showed no doubt, no hesitation as they pointed fingers at me, treating me as if I were a stranger capable of such betrayal. In the back of my mind, I couldn't help but think of my older brother, Jack, who they had always doted on, the so-called golden child who could do no wrong. Jack, who had always seemed to resent me in quiet, subtle ways I couldn't quite put my finger on. And soon, I discovered why. It was Jack who had set me up. Somehow, he had forged my name and manipulated the situation, so that all signs pointed directly at me as the culprit. My parents didn't even consider that Jack could be responsible. They were so certain of my guilt that they didn't allow me a chance to defend myself. They kicked me out that very night, telling me I was no longer welcome in their home. The pain of that betrayal left me in shock. I was numb as I packed up a few belongings and walked out, suddenly homeless and completely alone. With no family to turn to and nowhere to go, I ended up crashing on a friend's couch. My life fell apart quickly. I had to drop out of college because I could no longer afford it, and instead, I started taking on any job I could find just to survive. I went from waiting tables to cleaning houses, doing whatever it took to make ends meet. It was a humbling and devastating period, full of sleepless nights and constant anxiety about the future. For months, I tried reaching out to my parents, hoping they might finally listen to me. I called, texted, even sent emails, desperately trying to convince them of my innocence. But every attempt went unanswered. They had cut me off as if I had never existed. Word spread through our family, and soon even my extended relatives turned their backs on me, convinced I was nothing more than a thief who had betrayed my own parents. Eventually, I stopped trying to contact them. It was just too painful, and I needed to focus on rebuilding my life. Over time, I moved to a new city and found a stable job, slowly piecing together a new support system. Along the way, I met an incredible woman, Lisa. She was there for me in ways that my family never had been, encouraging me, helping me regain confidence in myself, and reminding me that I was not defined by my family's rejection. Gradually, I found a sense of peace and acceptance, though the wound of my family's betrayal never fully healed. Then, 5 years later, I received a message out of the blue. My mom had reached out to me on Facebook. She wrote that she and my dad had realized they'd made a mistake and wanted to reconnect. My heart pounded as I read her message. She said they were sorry for not believing me and hoped I would give them a chance to make amends. Anger, hurt, and a small spark of hope churned inside me. Part of me wanted to scream at them for the years of pain they had put me through, but there was another part that still longed for my family. I talked it over with Lisa, who was supportive as always, reminding me that I didn't owe them anything, but suggesting that meeting them might give me closure. After days of agonizing over it, I finally agreed to meet them. We arranged to meet at a cafe in my hometown. Walking in, I felt like a stranger in a place that used to be familiar. I spotted them sitting at a table, and they looked older, more worn down than I remembered. My dad's hair had turned gray, and my mom had lines on her face that hadn't been there before. When they saw me, they both stood up, my mom reaching out as if to hug me, but I took a step back. "Let's just talk," I said, keeping my voice steady. They began with apologies, admitting they'd been wrong and expressing regret for not believing me. My dad confessed that Jack had admitted to framing me about a year ago, but they hadn't known how to reach out to me. They both said they missed me and wanted to be a family again. Hearing their words was like pouring salt on an open wound. "Do you think an apology is enough?" I replied, my voice filled with years of pent-up frustration. "You destroyed my life over a lie, without even giving me a chance to explain." My mom began to cry, and my dad looked like he'd been punched. They tried to explain, saying they had been scared and confused at the time, that they had trusted Jack because he'd never given them a reason to doubt him before. It took them years to realize their mistake, but by then, they didn't know how to reach out or what to say. As I sat there listening to their explanations, emotions swirled within me, rage, grief, and something else I couldn't quite define. Beneath the hurt and resentment, there was still a flicker of the love I had once felt for them. But I wasn't ready to forgive them, not yet. I needed time to process everything they had said and decide if there was any way forward. Returning home, Lisa became my anchor. I can't overstate how much she held me together through this entire ordeal. She listened as I ranted, raved, cried, and cursed. She never once judged me, whether I was considering giving my family another chance or wanting to cut ties with them forever. Her patience was practically saintly. Over time, days turned into weeks, and I started to communicate with my parents again, first through text messages and emails. Each exchange was tense and awkward, filled with words left unsaid. My mom often sent long, emotional paragraphs about how much they missed me and how sorry they were for what had happened. My dad was more reserved, but his guilt was obvious, woven through the concise sentences he'd send. They both seemed to be walking on eggshells, trying to avoid saying anything that might push me away. One evening, after an especially exhausting day at work, I came home and found a letter from my brother, Jack. It was a heartfelt, handwritten apology, packed with regret. Jack admitted that back then, he'd been an insecure, jealous idiot. He explained that he'd always felt overshadowed by me, the golden child, and in a moment of desperation, he did something he now regretted deeply. He wasn't expecting me to forgive him, but he felt that he needed to own up to his actions. Reading that letter was overwhelming. I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and strangely, a bit of relief. At least now I had the full story. Jack's words didn't magically undo the years of pain, but they added a layer of understanding that had been missing. So, I decided to call him. Our conversation was painfully awkward. Jack was practically groveling, his voice thick with guilt and shame. I didn't let him off the hook easily. I yelled, cursed, and let out all the frustration I'd kept bottled up for years. And Jack just took it. He didn't try to justify himself or make excuses. He accepted every word I threw at him. Over the next few months, I slowly started to reconnect with my parents as well. It began with a once-a-month lunch at a neutral location. Those early meetings were uncomfortable, full of forced small talk and long silences. But gradually we started having real conversations. We talked about the years we'd lost, their regrets, and my anger. These lunches were anything but easy. Every meeting dredged up old wounds. But they also gave us a chance to start healing. One day, during one of our lunches, my mom unexpectedly broke down. She began sobbing uncontrollably in the middle of the restaurant, repeatedly saying how sorry she was and how she felt she'd failed as a mother. Seeing her like that, so raw and broken, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. My dad, who was usually stoic, looked like he was close to tears too. That moment felt like a turning point. We sat there together, crying and holding each other, and for the first time in years, I felt a small flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could work through this. As for Jack, our relationship remains a work in progress. We started talking more frequently, but it was clear that the damage he had done couldn't be repaired with just a few apologies. We'd have to rebuild trust from the ground up. He made an effort, though. He showed up, took responsibility for his actions, and tried to make amends in every way he could. At one point, he even offered to pay me back the money he'd framed me for, but I declined. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. Eventually, one weekend, I agreed to visit Jack and his wife. Lisa came with me for support. I was nervous as hell, but I knew it was a step I needed to take if I wanted to move forward. To my surprise, the visit was calm. We talked, laughed a little awkwardly, and for a few moments it almost felt like old times. Jack's wife was lovely and clearly supportive of our reconciliation. It gave me a glimmer of hope that maybe, someday, things could feel normal again. It's far from a smooth journey. There are still days when the bitterness creeps in, and I remember the betrayal all over again, feeling the anger rise within me. But I'm learning to let go, little by little. I realized that holding on to that anger was only hurting me. If I wanted to heal, I had to start forgiving, not for them, but for myself. Lisa and I have had a lot of conversations about the future. We're engaged now and planning our wedding, which constantly reminds me how far I've come since that night I was kicked out. My parents want to be involved in the wedding, and I'm cautiously allowing them to participate. It's not perfect. It never will be, but it's a start. Life is messy and complicated, and people make mistakes, sometimes ones that alter lives. My parents and Jack did, and it took me years to even consider forgiving them. But I've come to understand that people can change, and sometimes they deserve a second chance. This won't erase the past, but it might pave the way for a better future. I'm still working on fully forgiving them and figuring out what our relationship will look like. But for now, I'm taking things one day at a time, one step at a time. And that's enough